Darkcast Network, indie pods with a dark side.
In October 1347, 12 ships from the Black Sea docked at the Sicilian port of Messina, and the people who gathered at the docks were met with a horrifying discovery. Any sailor not already dead was severely ill and covered in black boils oozing pus and blood. The ships were ordered to depart immediately, but the damage had already been done. The Black Death went on to kill over 20 million people, almost 1/3 of the population in Europe over the next 5 years, and became the most fatal pandemic recorded in human history.
Venice, Italy is situated on over 100 small islands connected with bridges and canals, so you can imagine how devastating a plague would be on an island community like that. When the plague hit Venice, the residents looked for ways to handle the sick and the dead. One solution they had come up with was that of Poveglia Island. My name is Amber.
And I'm Gina.
And on today's Wicked Wednesday, we are going to talk about the 17-acre island that became known as the Island of Ghosts.
Ooh,
Ghosts.
Spooky. Poveglia is a small island located between Venice and Lido in the Venetian lagoon of northern Italy. This little chunk of land has been around for a long time, as documentation names it as far back as the year 421 AD, and was said to be a flourishing economic center with a growing population up until 1378. During the War of Chioggia, the people of Poveglia were evacuated to Venice, and when the war was finally over in 1381, Poveglia lay in total devastation, with only a few inhabitants being able to return home. In the 14th century, when Venice grew into a major power, they used Poveglia as a defensive location. A fort was built on the island to establish an outpost that could destroy enemy ships that tried to reach the city. Other than the fort being built, Poveglia remained abandoned up until the plague hit.
During the first outbreak of the plague, commonly referred to as the Black Death, it is said that Venice created the first modern quarantine system. Ships were detained, and any sailor or traveler suspected of being infected with the plague were held on the ship for a period of 40 days. The word quarantine comes from the Italian word for 40. However, quarantining the ill wasn't very effective, and the population of Venice was devastated. Venice was a hub for international trade and welcomed ships from all over the known world, thus making it very susceptible to the spreading of the disease. Over the course of a few years, starting back in 1348, the Black Death's toll was between 75 and 200 million people when it reached London. Even then, the plague didn't go away, and it would pop back into existence over the centuries.
Venice continued its quarantining practices, and when the plague struck again, anyone suspected of infection was taken to one of the outlying islands for quarantine and remained there until they recovered or died, the latter being the most usual outcome. On one of the islands to the northeast of Poveglia, it is said that there were about 500 people dying per day, and the city quickly got overwhelmed with burying them all. How did they handle that? Mass graves. It is said that so many people were dying that workers would literally spend all day collecting dead bodies and throwing them into mass graves without a break. Sometimes, when the victims were so ill they were unable to move or speak, they were mistaken for dead and tossed in with the corpses.
Yeah, the plague is no joke. People infected with the bubonic plague, which is the most common type, isn't that a terrifying sentiment? There is a common type of plague, usually developed symptoms as you'd expect with the flu or a cold. Sudden onset of fever, chills, head and body aches, and weakness, vomiting, and nausea. The incubation period for it ranged from 1 to 7 days before you'd start seeing these symptoms. As mentioned, it is the most common form of plague and is caused by the bite of an infected flea. It enters the body through the bite and then travels to a lymph node, which becomes inflamed and painful. At advanced stages of the infection, the lymph node can turn into open sores filled with pus. Human-to-human transmission of the bubonic plague is rare, but when it advances further and spreads to the lungs, it becomes the more severe type of plague, pneumonic plague or lung-based plague. Incubation for pneumonic plague can be as short as 24 hours, and any person with pneumonic plague can transmit the disease to someone via droplets. If pneumonic plague is left untreated or undiagnosed, it can be fatal. You're more likely to recover if it is detected and treated early, within 24 hours of the symptom onset, with common antibiotics.
I had no idea that the bubonic plague was transmitted through fleas. That is so disturbing. And this all considering the fact that we just went through a pandemic. Cool, we just lived this. And I mean, we kind of still are, but not to the same extent. So I just, oh God, this is giving me the heebs for real. Okay, germaphobes, I'm sorry. maybe don't listen to this one.
Hell do you think I felt reading all of this shit?
I need to wash my hands.
I hate it so much. I cleaned my house so many times.
I'm gonna, where's some Lysol wipes? Oh God. Oh. In 1777, Venice's Magistrate of Health turned Poveglia into its primary plague checkpoint. Any ship that sailed into Venice was required to stop at Poveglia for inspection. If anyone on board the ship showed any signs of the plague, Venice ordered them to be quarantined on Poveglia Island, and this remained Poveglia's primary function until 1814. When people on land began to show symptoms of the plague, they were rounded up and sent to Poveglia as well. Enter one of Amber's favorite icons, the plague doctor. During the 16th and 17th centuries, plague doctors were hired by the cities to treat infected patients, although they rarely cured them and instead just served as record keepers for the death tolls and the number of infected people demographically. These doctors had mixed reputations with the people. A lot of them were seen as bad omens, and the people took their presence as a warning to leave the area or that death was near. Plague doctors practiced bloodletting and other remedies like putting frogs or leeches on the inflamed lymph nodes. They were even requested to do autopsies to help determine the cause of death and how the plague affected people in certain places. In many cases, the doctors weren't experienced doctors or surgeons and were just volunteers, second-rate doctors, or young doctors just starting out their careers.
Now, we're all familiar with the iconic image of the plague doctor. The large black overcoat, cloak, black gloves, black boots, hat or hood, and the white bird-like mask. Plague doctors have worn a mask of some sort since at least 1373, but in the epidemic from 1656 to 1658 in Rome, the first known observation of the herbal stuffed beak mask was recorded. These masks were designed so that the beak would hold dried flowers like roses or carnations, herbs like lavender and peppermint, camphor, or a vinegar sponge, as well as juniper berry, ambergris, cloves, and other items. The purpose of the mask was so that the doctors could have their hands free to examine the patient, or corpse, and still utilize the benefits of the herbs. The theory back then was that the epidemics were caused by miasma, a noxious form of bad air that rose from the rotting corpses of the infected. They believed that the herbs would counter the evil smells of the plague and prevent them from becoming infected, And it also helped keep away the smells of decaying bodies. Gruesome, but true.
Mm-hmm.
The haunting image of a plague doctor was often the last thing a patient saw before death, and that's why they were regarded as an omen of death.
I might be getting ahead of myself here, or I don't know, but was there any proof to the use of those things in the mask helping to like keep the doctors safe from getting it? Or
really the only thing that it did was help with the smell, because that the air wasn't how they were getting infected.
No,
it was,
of course not.
the transmission of bodily fluids of any kind of something. So,
but
no,
this was before they understood how that worked.
exactly. So it just kind of helped. It was their medieval version of freaking
like smelling salts, or like the stuff you wipe
Vicks under your nose to help with the smell or something.
Yeah. I also didn't know that they put herbs and stuff like that in them. I had no idea.
It kind of acted as like a filter.
Yeah.
Like a modern, or like
much.
Like not a modern day, because that's not modern, but you know what I mean. The opposite of modern day.
Well, I mean, there are masks now that have filters and stuff on them.
That was the first rendition of filtered masks.
Could you imagine if everybody had been walking around during the pandemic with like plague doctor masks on?
God, I was born in the wrong era.
You really were. That would be terrifying and like really amusing all at the same time, actually. And really hard to like put in your purse.
It wouldn't go in my purse. That should be on my face 24/7.
All the time?
24/7.
Yeah.
Open the front door. You knock on my door. I open the door wearing the mask.
Plague mask. Be like, oh, I'm not going to fuck with her. Bye.
Okay, bye. I'm out.
Serves more than one purpose.
Exactly.
Yes. Okay. Not only were the sick being held on Poveglia, though, if a citizen stole or committed other crimes, they were carted off to the island as well to live out the rest of their lives. How fucking cruel. Since Poveglia had been abandoned off and on, the place was unkempt and not really fit for habitation. Bodies were burned to help stop the spread of the plague when they were unable to keep up with the burial of all the bodies. It is said that the tiny island hosted over 100,000 infected people living out their final agonizing days, or sometimes hours, there. Due to the burning of so many bodies, they say that the soil consists of 50% human ash. On one of the other neighboring islands that had been used for quarantine, they found mass graves with the remains of thousands of plague victims. But Poveglia has yet to be fully investigated. Regardless, that is thousands and thousands of people who died a very agonizing death on the soil of Poveglia Island. To this day, fishermen steer clear of the island out of fear of pulling up human bones in their nets.
Side note,
I blame them.
They also claim that charred human remains, bones and stuff, not really remains because it's been so long, but charred human bones still wash up on the shores of Poveglia. And I kept a lot of this information vague because there's so much conflicting information. So, some people were saying that it was like 110,000 infected people, and then there was like 160,000 people. And I was like, well, you know what? If I keep it if I just say over 100,000, then I'm covering everybody, and I'm not going to go like Price is Right without going over.
Regardless, it was a lot of people.
It was a lot of fucking people.
Ugh.
Anyway. Oh, the deaths don't stop there, though. In 1922, Venice transformed Poveglia Island, which they had dubbed Island of Ghosts, by building a mental hospital. Many of the buildings were repurposed for mentally ill patients, and mental illness wasn't as clearly defined back then as it is today. The hospital thus became home to many patients with physical disabilities, mental conditions, and neurological problems. Basically, anyone who behaved outside the cultural norm was often associated with mental illness as well, and sent off to Poveglia. The hospital, asylum, whatever you want to call it, was poorly constructed and seemed to be used as a place of exile rather than rehabilitation. Some of the patients regularly reported seeing the ghosts of the plague victims and said they were kept up at night by the screams of the tortured souls. It is also rumored that one of the doctors hired to work in the hospital in the 1930s was a less than stellar guy.
So you send somebody who's already struggling to an island where they are seeing ghosts and hearing screams of tortured souls, and the doctors are probably just like, oh, that's just your mental illness. You're not really seeing anything.
Exactly.
Cool. The doctor in question, Dr. Paolo, believed that lobotomies were a great way to cure and treat mental illness, so he performed them on several patients, typically against their will. Tools he used to perform these experiments were hammers, chisels, and drills, all without the use of anesthesia or regard for sanitation and sterilization. He was thought to have saved his most horrific experiments to be carried out up in the bell tower of the hospital that he saved for his special patients. Not entirely sure what made them special or what exactly he did up there, but the horrific screams of his victims could be heard across the island. Some of the machines the doctor used to perform his cruel experimental procedures can still be seen in the decaying rooms of the hospital today. He also allegedly used other torturous treatments as electric shocks and force feeding. The patients were often chained to their beds or left in dark rooms for days, and many of Dr. Paolo's patients died under his care and were buried in unmarked graves.
Stand-up guy.
Oh my God.
According to the legend, the doctor eventually lost his own mind, climbed to the top of the bell tower, and flung himself to his death. Of course, some varying accounts of this claim was that he was pushed by either an angry island spirit or by some of his furious patients. A nurse supposedly witnessed him fall and claimed that he initially survived the fall, but a ghostly mist covered his body on the ground and choked him to death. Another part of the doctor's legend is that some claim that he was seized, still alive, by some of the patients he performed lobotomies against their will on, and they bricked him up in the wall of the bell tower. Other versions say that the patients placed him in the wall after his death. Now, the bell in the bell tower was removed decades ago, but locals still claim to hear its chimes from the island. And the ruins of the hospital are still there, slowly being reclaimed by the foliage and the land.
I wouldn't blame them if they did haul his ass up there and throw him off. So,
Yep.
Just saying. When the mental hospital was closed in 1968, the island was sold to a private owner who didn't have it very long before he sold it to yet another owner. Both owners said they couldn't even handle being on the island as the atmosphere was just too heavy and morbid. Years after the hospital was shut down, a family purchased the island with the intention of building a private holiday home there. However, their first night there terrified them so badly that within just hours of arriving and settling in, despite their excitement about their new adventure, they fled the island and never returned. They reported that their daughter's face was nearly ripped off by an angry resident entity. Did they not do any homework on this island before they decided to buy it to turn into a vacation property?
They could have just been skeptics and, nothing like that's going to happen. We'll turn this place around and make it great once again, or some
I don't care how
shit.
big of a skeptic you are. It's like, to me, this island is almost like Chernobyl. Like, just don't fucking touch it. You know?
It reminded me of like the wreckage of the Titanic. It's basically the graveyard for everyone that lost their lives. Like, just leave it alone. Just let them rest in peace.
Don't mess with that.
The island's kind of the
Yeah.
same thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
With thousands and thousands of plague victims' deaths, plus the asylum patients' deaths, as well as criminals' deaths who were exiled to the island. And I forgot to mention the people that lost their lives during the war.
Mm-hmm.
It is no wonder that the island is said to be haunted. Poveglia Island has been dubbed the most haunted island in the world by the Italians that inhabit nearby. It is said to be so evil that you would be hard-pressed to find an Italian willing to set foot on the island. Visitation to the island is illegal and has been for decades, but naturally, that doesn't stop people from hopping on a boat and heading over. Regardless of whether or not they venture over to the island as a dare or to have some sort of paranormal encounter, almost all return to the main island shaken. They report a feeling of being watched when on the island, and some even report being scratched and pushed by invisible forces. They report seeing shadows on walls moving along with them as they explore the ruins. A handful of psychics brought to the island claim there is an energy that can only be described as malignant. These psychics and other paranormal experts are frightened by these violent and angry spirits to the point that they never want to set foot back on the island.
The fact that it's illegal to travel to this island says a lot. But it's kind of like telling a toddler not to touch something that they're like, they shouldn't,
Exactly.
Oh, you're telling me I can't go, so now I really want to go.
Exactly.
It's just human nature to push against those kind of boundaries, No, I wouldn't be going. No, thank you. There are so many reports from illegal visitors to the island. But one of them talks about a group of thrill seekers who went to the island, and when they entered the abandoned mental hospital, they felt a heavy sense of dread around them. Accompanied by this is intense feelings of dread. They heard a deep voice that warned, "Leave immediately and do not return." And they quickly complied. By the mid-20th century, the facility was converted into a geriatric center, which closed in 1975. As Amber mentioned, it is illegal to visit the island. However, you can visit with special permission granted by the municipality. Ghost Adventures, of course, filmed episode 3 of their third season, which aired on November 13th, 2009 on Poveglia Island. Scariest Places on Earth also got permission to film there.
I think, just as we've discussed with the other locations, that with that sort of tragedy happening, the place is just going to feel different.
Mm-hmm.
I think Poveglia is on a whole new level, though. Thousands and thousands of people died on that island, or were sent there to die, essentially. I can't imagine what it must have been like to die from the plague back in those days. And don't even get me started on the doctor.
Mm-mm.
Again, we just scratched the surface of the history and lore of this place to give you a small insight, but we could rabbit hole and dive super deep. Most of the history and stories for Poveglia, though, are based on legend, unlike the other locations that we have talked about so far. Regardless, the evidence they have uncovered has backed up the claim of the deaths of thousands of people on that island. And it's honestly hard to comprehend that.
If you think about how much emotion and devastation and sadness and despair that was felt on that island by so many people, whether it's the war or the plague or the mental hospital, these are all things that are going to imprint on this space. And there's a lot of horrible things that happen to people on this island. So to me, it's almost more believable that this island is haunted than it is the other places that we've covered, just because so many people lost their lives there and were impacted in such a negative way. So it's like you come into this space where these people suffered and you're trotting along having a grand old time. It's like, get the fuck out. Like, that is so disrespectful to come to this place where so many people suffered and lost their lives just to like get a thrill. So I'd be haunting some people too.
Same.
I think. If you liked this series and wouldn't mind hearing an episode every once in a while throughout the year, let us know. Follow us on Instagram or TikTok at Weird True Crime to see some incredible pictures of Poveglia Island, or shoot us an email at weirdtruecrime@gmail.com if you just want to say hi.
We hope you enjoyed today's installment of Wicked Wednesday. And don't worry, we have one more spooky place to share with you before October is over. Let's face it, though. It's always Halloween in our creepy corner of chaos.
Especially Amber's.
I wasn't gonna go there, but
let's be honest. Yes.
Let's be honest here.
Until next time, stay safe.
And make good choices. Bye-bye.
See ya.